What happened Saturday behind the scenes at GoDaddy that led you to pull this site and make this announcement Sunday evening?
We always have to ride the fence on top of making sure that we are protecting a free and open internet, and certainly First Amendment rights matter, not just in speech, but on the internet as well. But when the line gets crossed and that speech starts to incite violence, then we have a responsibility to take that down. And clearly, with the events that happened in Charlottesville, we felt the Daily Stormer went too far, crossed the line. We decided, look, we're going to take this down. We don't think it has any business being on the internet, so we gave 24 hours notice to the Daily Stormer to move their site somewhere else.
Why host a site to begin with that promotes anti-Semitism, neo-Nazism, and white nationalism?
Well, I understand that position. Still, First Amendment rights protect people's ability to represent their beliefs. And again, it's a very fine line between making sure we're not being a censor and making sure we're acting in a responsible manner that will take it down.
But again, it feels wrong to consumers. It feels wrong if your browser is making decisions about what content can and cannot be online. And if we chain together a whole bunch of different entities, all of which are making slightly different moral decisions, the risk is that we collapse the internet to what is the lowest common denominator. And again, I think that's a real risk, and that's something that we need to be aware of and we need to think through. But we have to think about what's the consequence if we let every link in the chain make that decision on what is and what is not allowed content. If you've never heard of Cloudflare before and you hear that we are choosing what content you can and cannot see online, does that make you feel good or bad? Again, I think it's similar to if I said, the laptop that you were using is not going to let you go to some sites, but it will let you go to others, and that's made by the decision of the manufacturer of that laptop.
Now other tech companies are following GoDaddy's lead and pulling the plug on the Daily Stormer. Daily Stormer's YouTube channel has been removed and their Twitter accounts has been deactivated for violating community guidelines. Finally! Wow, it really took that long, didn't it? At DocFang tweets, thanks YouTube for standing up to white supremacists at Daily Stormer. You are on the right side of history and I will remain loyal customer. So what's your take on the shutdown of Daily Stormer and who's next? Let us know in the comments below.
A white nationalist website sparked controversy in the wake of the violence in Charlottesville last weekend after it published a hate-filled article about one of the victims.
This is something that we've seen kind of a groundswell in over the past year when you had especially consumer-facing social media sites like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram come to grips with the fact that they really had to address this in a more direct way because their consumers were being harassed online. And you've seen a more direct approach from them. And now it's moving into these more backbone companies like the actual domain name registrars and the people hosting the websites rather than just social media companies taking aim at individual members. Oh, I mean, 100%. When you have voices coming up very loudly and saying to a company, you're doing business with this organization and this website, you need to look more closely at that. When you have a big incident like this, that gives it the publicity it needs for the company to go in and say, oh, maybe we should have noticed these guys on our own, but we didn't. Now that it's been brought to our attention, we'll address this. But that does bring up the issue of how much policing a technology company can do and should do. You see companies, especially like Facebook, like YouTube, which is owned by Google, investing a tremendous amount of money recently in developing automated systems and hiring many human watchers to go through what's happening on their networks to try to filter out objectionable material.
One of my fellow employees came up to me the day that we took it offline and said, hey, is this the day the internet dies? The question is this hypocritical? Yes.
I don't care if it's a certain set of princesses in compromising situations. Until a legitimate court organization actually says you have an obligation to take this site down, then that's what we're going to follow. And that's the consistent policy that we have.
Fuck them. They're off the internet.
What we really wanted to avoid was, just in the same way we don't want to determine who's bad, and we don't think it's appropriate for us to determine who's bad, we also don't want to be the organization that's determining who's good.
Fuck them. They're off the internet.
And so when we get criticism for sites which are on our network, what I hope that you'll bear in mind, because undoubtedly there is something that uses our network that you hate. What I hope you'll bear in mind is that the stakes in this are higher than you think. if we had made determinations of kicking things off before, it would have been much more difficult to have the position that we are actually just this neutral third party. And the minute that we start down that path, there is a slippery slope to a place where we are the ones making that determination on what is good and what is bad. And so instead, what we think of ourselves again as is Switzerland. We think of ourselves as that neutral party, and nobody really likes the Swiss, but they respect them. And I hope that that's kind of the place that we're at as well.
Fuck them. They're off the internet.
That we really didn't think that it was our position to be an internet censor. We didn't want to choose, was this good content or bad content?
Fuck them. They're off the internet.
Because, again, we shouldn't be determining what is allowed and not allowed.
The Wall Street Journal reported that big tech companies are using their power to silence certain political views. Both Google and web hosting service GoDaddy stopped providing hosting support for Daily Stormer. Meanwhile, the hotel website Airbnb announced it will permanently ban white supremacists from using its service to book rooms. PayPal says it won't let white supremacist groups use its payment platform. Even mentioning their name probably just got us written up by the Southern Poverty Law Center as dangerous alt-right subversives or something. We don't care. There's a principle at stake here, and it's worth defending regardless. We should be very concerned by the prospect of big companies using their power to enforce ideological conformity, even when it seems only to affect people we don't like, as it does right now. The 2015 Pew poll found that 40% of millennials already believe in restricting speech they believe is offensive. Those are the people who are going to be running this world very soon. You think they'll think twice before banning websites they don't like? They won't. It's the Daily Stormer today, fine. But who's it going to be next week or next year? The National Right to Life? FoxNews.com? Catholic Charities? Why wouldn't it be? And why wouldn't Airbnb ban public supporters of Trump from getting rooms? They support terrorism. Why wouldn't Facebook eliminate all references to, I don't know, pro-life positions? Now, the First Amendment is America's most famous freedom, the strongest sign that our country is dedicated to the personal liberty of every person here. The fact that this right applies to the most hated members of society isn't a weakness, it's the whole point. It's proof of how robust that right is. Now, tech companies aren't the government, and they're not bound by the same rules as a consequence of that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't push back and do it loudly. The biggest tech firms are more powerful than any monopolies in the Gilded Age, and they're far less restrained and far less trustworthy. In some ways, they're more dangerous even than overreaching government because they're less accountable. They could make this country a place you would not want to live, and they could probably do it quickly, and they probably will do it unless they're brought to heel.
Fuck them. They're off the internet.
Fuck them. They're off the internet.